An honor today to bring back a friend of the program, an incredible musician who then went off and became a decorated entertainment lawyer and record producer, launching 510 Records. Elliot Cahn, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Thanks, Jake. And manager.
Manager. No, so I want to be clear. Can you just talk to the audience a little bit about, live album, Cahn and I, The Golden Age of Rock and Roll, sold 500,000 copies.
And everything else sold about 104 copies.
But explain at the core, my gut tells me now in today's world, you have so many people having to make a very similar decision, but did you pursue the law degree because you didn't want to be a starving genius?
Let's start with the album.
Go ahead.
Cahn and I's first 3 albums did not do very well. I mean, they didn't sell 103 copies, but they sold maybe 70 or 80, 90,000 copies. And the second one was produced by Eddie Kramer, of course, worked with Jimi Hendrix.
Absolutely.
And the third one was produced by Jeff Barry, who, produced umpteen big hits in his career, and that still didn't work. So we were trying to figure out, okay, maybe we're just never going to sell any records. And then somebody at our record company came up with the idea of joint marketing it through K-Tel, which at the time was a record company that sold a lot of stuff on television.
Wow.
I don't think it still exists.
No, but I know they used to put out these compilation records like disco record. I love K-Tel.
Yep. So it was jointly marketed through Kama Sutra, which was our label, and K-Tel with a campaign on television, which is why it sold well, because it was a double album, and 3 sides were live, from a show at Winterland in San Francisco, and the 4th one was in the studio, but it was nothing special, and it sold well because of the marketing. So, there was that.
Well, let me ask you, okay, so obviously that's crucial, but were there any, you have to excuse my naivety, but were there any songs that became very radio-friendly?
No.
No, interesting. Unbelievable.
No, not at all.
Wow. I mean, the whole thing before, I guess, but, to the point, how the resolution or the sort of ending, did you have a good departure from Cahn?
No, it was terrible.
Oh, man.
It was just terrible. And busted friendships. I mean, it's all patched up now. This is a long, long, long time ago. But it ended up in a lawsuit, and I had nightmares for years, and it was horrible.
But I don't really need to, we don't need to get into the dirty laundry, so to speak, but what were you, aside from just being a sentient being that cares about people and, relationships, what was keeping you up at night exactly? I mean, what was the lawsuit about?
Oh, it was about money, of course.
Of course.
That's what they usually are. We got into a fight about how much money I was going to get when I left, and it just got ugly, unfortunately. And like idiots, like a bunch of bright Ivy League students, you would have thought we would have had an agreement, and we had no written agreement.
Oh, damn it.
And one thing I learned is that the human memory is a very fallible thing.
You're darn right, brother.
And it very quickly degenerated into you said, well, fuck you, I didn't say that, you said. And it just got nasty. It's unfortunate. But the nightmares were about the friends that I lost.
Yeah.
Because there were 2 or 3 people in the group who were very good friends of mine at the time. And
I would love it, just as an aside, you just said that things have been patched up. I often talk to my older daughter, Hannah, about the fallibility of memory, but also like the idea that, friendships, I think it's just really important to talk about the latent opportunities to resolve and reconnect, because sometimes people feel like and you felt it too. It's the end of the world, and it's crushing, and yet the human spirit and the heart ultimately forgives. I mean, you have basically made amends with these people. So there's drama for a minute, but over time, can you talk about the effort that has to be made by everybody in order to reconcile?
Well, I mean, I had long since forgiven. And then I got a call from their drummer. This goes back about 10 years or so. And he told me that his sister, who was a nun, was at a fundraiser for her convent and was sitting at a dinner table just talking to, a guy on her right. And she mentioned that her brother played drums in Sha Na Na, and lo and behold, he was working for a producer of Broadway plays who had been trying to find Sha Na Na for a while because he was interested in doing sort of a Jersey Boys kind of thing,
right,
based around Sha Na Na.
Wow.
So Jocko, the drummer, called me up and said, you're an entertainment lawyer. Would you negotiate this thing for us? So that was sort of the first step in our reconciliation.
Was Jocko there with you when you left?
Yes.
Wow. Holy cow. And he's like, yo, help. Now you can really negotiate for the first time for the band.
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, that was sort of like the first step in our reconciliation. And hell, life is too short to carry grudges.
No, it's
happened 50 years ago.
No, I just think it's good, man. I think I really so. I mean, we're talking to a cat. You guys were all Ivy Leaguers, and then, I mean, you have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, why did you? What was the impetus? I mean, at the time, as best you can, because did you want to address some of these, the lack of paperwork, was that the impetus to get into, music litigation? No. Okay.
It would be great. It would be a great story.
It would, yeah.
The through line where that continues. No, I left Sha Na Na and then got talked into going out on the road for another year with another band. A guy named Henry Gross, who had been...
Oh, my God, my dear brother. This is what I'm talking about. Dude, I love the Gross man, dude.
Yeah. So anyway, Henry was an old friend of mine. And I had quit Sha Na Na thinking I'm never going to do this again. And he called me up and said, look, I got a record deal. And I just booked up the wazoo for the next year. And would you come out on the road and play guitar and sing with me? And I said, nah, I'm really done with this. And he kept calling. He's a very persuasive guy.
Wow.
So he called me and called me and called me. And finally I said, oh, okay. So I went out on the road with him for a year. And then I was really done. When his album cycle finished, I was just so done with being a road musician. I just really didn't want to do it anymore.
The road was eating you alive, yeah.
It was. And it was just, more than that, I just thought, this is not healthy for my soul. That's what it was. I started taking a look at musicians who'd been on the road several years more than I had been. And I was thinking, is that what you want to be?
Right.
No, that's not what I want to be. And can you feel yourself being sucked into being a little bit like that? Yeah. So this is not good. I better get out of here. It was like I've crawled down the rabbit hole about as far as I can go and still be able to turn around. Another year of this, and I'm going to be a lost soul. So I just figured I better get out of this. So I quit. And I hadn't finished college. I had dropped out of Columbia after 2.5 years. And so I moved out to the West Coast, really with no idea what I was going to do, and found myself living 4 or 5 miles from the Berkeley campus and figured, okay, maybe I can do it this time when I sure as hell couldn't do it before. And so I finished up, did really well, decided to go to law school, not for any particular reason, and went to law school, and then went to graduate school the same time I was going to law school, and was mostly advising trial attorneys on jury selection.
Wow.
And and trial presentation. I had gotten very interested in that while I was in grad school. And so when I got out of law school and grad school, I went straight to the Stanford Research Institute, which is a big think tank in Menlo Park, and worked there for 2 or 3 years, and then got tricked into being a lawyer, really, by a friend of a friend who was the chairman of the board of a small high-tech company in Silicon Valley.
Wow.
And he hired me to do something quite different from being a lawyer. And all the time, I think, planning on getting me to be their in-house lawyer, because it turned out that they were in terrible trouble financially and couldn't afford their legal bills from these big fancy law firms. And so I said, sure, no problem. You got a little small legal problem, no problem. And it turned out that their small legal problem was humongous legal problems. Geez. And that was my first job as a lawyer, but it had nothing to do with the music business at all. And they went under. And I needed a job. I had a wife in graduate school and a baby, and my Cahn money was basically gone, and I needed to work. And I really didn't want to be a lawyer particularly. But I started looking at the daily legal, the classified ads in the daily legal newspaper in the Bay Area, and boom, there was an advertisement for a music business lawyer in San Francisco, which is an unusual position there. And I figured, I can probably get this job just because of my background.
I want to go back. I don't know what it was like. I remember interviewing a great percussionist, Bill Summers, who was lived in Detroit, and then he had an opportunity to move out to or go to grad school at Berkeley, and it sounds insane now, but at the time, if you were an in-state resident, you could go to any state school for free there.
Well, it wasn't free, but it was almost free. I think at one point I was going to law school and graduate school for, like $250 a semester. It's just something crazy.
Elliot, I need to stop. So explain, because this is just important for me to understand, because I'm always freaking out about, there was a period of time, Cahn and I, even in the beginning of your existence, where a trade union cat, like a carpenter, electrician, they weren't making that much less than doctors and lawyers. And then all of a sudden there was this sort of, sort of splitting off of like what our society considered to be something very valuable profession versus something that was more of a blue collar. A lot of it had to do with education and the degrees. But at that time, how come the greed factor wasn't as high? Can you just talk about how that doesn't sound, you're getting set for the rest of your life, even though you didn't really want to be a lawyer and you got tricked into it, and then you find the classified ad. The point is, these degrees today, they're going to run people in debt hundreds of thousands of dollars.
They're really expensive. Yeah, education is what happened in California is that there was a referendum called Prop 13 that was passed in California, and what it did was cut way back on property taxes. And property taxes turned out to have been funding the California state education system by and large.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah, that's what made it possible for, you'd be able to go to UC Berkeley and be in a joint graduate degree program.
Insane.
$100 a year, where it's probably $60,000 a year now.
And then all the living expenses on top of that, too. It was still a very affordable. I'm curious, were you living in Alameda, San Rafael? Where did you live when you were out?
I was living in a part of Oakland called Montclair, which is just a nice little kind of village.
And what a beautiful time to. I know you were sick of being a road dog. But you couldn't help unless you were just completely in a dark room. Just the vibrancy of how hot the music was. Were you checking out music at that time at all? Did you see any good?
Yeah, well, after I quit, I spent my first probably 2 years as a freelance journalist.
Oh, are you kidding me? None of this stuff is on the record. I love this, man.
So I figured, let me start writing about music because that's probably what I know best,
Yep.
and that's where I have my best contacts. So I did that, and I wrote for just a ton of publications. I wrote some articles for Rolling Stone, and for English for New Musical Express in England, and for the Los Angeles Free Press, and whoever would pay me to write an article.
Talk a little. Okay, so but again, you make it sound so simple. I mean, you had no degree, but yet you had a name from the being in Cahn. What were the things at that time in the mid '70s that you wanted to pull people's coats to?
Well, I was just thinking about this a few days ago. I think my favorite article the whole time was something I wrote for the LA Free Press, and it was about a white gospel group called the Oak Ridge Boys.
Oh my God!
Trying to transition from the white gospel world into the country world, and they did it very successfully. But at the time, it was a question. They were just starting to make that change, and I spent the better part of a day with them, and was just amazed by the stories they told me about the vitriol they were getting from their fan base for starting to sing secular songs. And in particular, they had recorded Get Together, the big Young Bucks hit. Sure. And got, just a ton of letters that they sent to me telling them that they were going to go straight to hell because they were singing secular songs.
I don't mean to laugh. Hold on, white gospel. Was there a touring circuit for white gospel bands?
Yeah.
Oh my God. So I mean, and then so when you linked up with, were they living in the Bay Area, or how did you, or down in
No, I think they were living outside of Nashville somewhere.
And
they just happened to be playing out there.
And you would say that they felt like they were already pretty commercially successful, but they were looking to move into,
country world.
Right, but what's interesting is now neo-country music you listen to on the radio is worship music. It's not gospel, but it's like preachy, it's weird.
Frequently, yeah. So, but this was like a bridge too far for their fan base.
So were you, to me, like, I cannot imagine taking the Jake Feinberg show into the Bay Area in the early 70s. Were you, was there anything local that you can point to that, Jack's on Sutter, there were like organ clubs everywhere. The Sons of Champlin was thriving. Obviously the Dead was out. It was still, Winterland was still in effect, the Cow Palace. Did you do any regional stuff with bands out there?
I'm just trying to remember. I remember there were a series of summertime shows at the baseball field where the Oakland A's played, which I think at the time was called the Oakland Stadium.
Yes.
And, they would have 2 or 3 really big shows every summer there. And
the concerts on the green, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That Bill Graham. Oh, my God. Break it down. That's unbelievable.
Yeah. So Rolling Stone sent me out to do an article about Fleetwood Mac. And Stevie Nicks and Lindsey Graham had just joined the band. And their first album with them had just come out. And when I was playing with Henry, Buckingham Nicks played, 1 or 2 shows with us. And I remember it was their very, very first public shows as Buckingham Nicks.
Whoa.
So it's not like I knew Stevie and Lindsey. They were my best friends or something. But, there's a certain fellowship of people out on the road. It's like being in the Marines together or something. So I knew them. And so I wrote an article about them. And I remember writing the article and saying, I think this particular iteration of Fleetwood Mac is going to be the most successful they've ever had. And what they got, like, Rolling Stone got a bunch of hate mail from Bob Welch fans, saying, how could you say that? You suck. So.
Well, that is phenomenal. So, what were the most pressing, what was the biggest challenge for you when you, after the company folded and you went into the WAN ads and got that the job in San Francisco. Yeah, I mean, what was like? Yeah, well, because it's interesting because it's not like I sort of was thinking about the interview this morning, and I was like, he's probably through all these, the racket of music, he probably wanted to go and address some of these issues, which of course was not the case. But what was the biggest challenging thing early on that where you can look back and say, I got thrown in the deep end, but, it was worth it because it really, I found my voice as a lawyer?
Well, let me think. The biggest challenge was dealing with a very difficult boss. It was a great practice. Right. He had a wonderful practice. It was just the two of us. He represented Winterland Productions, which at the time was the biggest T-shirt company in the world. And he represented Bill Graham, and he represented Journey and Carlos Santana. And
what was this cat's name?
Boston. I'm not going to tell you that.
Oh my God, dude! Because there's like a good 20 years of your history that's missing from the archive. Okay, so this cat. Yeah, so he was go ahead. He's
a very funny guy, but he was very difficult to work for. And the intercom system frequently was him sticking his head outside his office and screaming, "Hey, Jew boy!"
Oh no!
No, he was Jewish too, so it was like black people saying, "Hey, nigger."
Yeah, that. Okay, I'm glad to hear that. It was just slinging it around. Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, I worked for him for a couple of years. And most of my work was, doing a million T-shirt contracts from everybody from Madonna and Bruce Springsteen and Hall & Oates to people you've never heard of before. But I went off on my own, and the thrash, the speed metal world was just starting to happen in the Bay Area. Metallica was just starting to hit, and all of a sudden there were a ton of Metallica, copy bands in the Bay Area. And one of them had a guitar player whose dad was my mentor in graduate school.
No way.
Yeah. He's a terrific guitar player named Alex Skolnick. And his dad called me up one day and said, you remember my kid? And I said, yeah. Because he had a little kid. He said, well, my kid's now 6'2", and the hair down was like halfway down his back, and is a very good guitar player. So he was playing in a band called Testament. So I got Testament a record contract with a heavy metal label run by a guy named John Zazula, who had been Metallica's first manager and first label president. And his label had a joint venture with Atlantic. So I got these guys basically a major label deal, and I fired their manager for them because they didn't want to work with him anymore. And they kept asking me, "Do you want to do it?" And I kept saying no. And I kept trying to find them a manager, and people didn't realize at the time that speed metal could be financially successful. I just couldn't find them anybody. And every time I would come back empty-handed, they would say, well, why don't you do it? And I kept saying no. And then one day, I was living in Berkeley at this point, and I was driving into work, and there was sort of like an informal white-collar hitchhiking pool going on in Berkeley.
Oh, this is unbelievable. I love this.
And you would drive up to these spots, and there'd be a bunch of people in suits standing around. You'd pick one of them up, or two of them up, and if you had like three people in a car, you could go through the commute lanes.
Right.
The Bay Bridge,
right.
And not have to pay a toll, but more important than that, go through like 5 times as fast. So I picked up this guy, and he was sitting in the back seat, and we were talking. And it turns out that he was a musician and was a lawyer, and really wanted to get into the music business, but didn't, was dealing with a completely different angle of the law, and he was bored stiff doing it. So we just started talking, and I said, hey, I got a chance to manage this band. Would you want to do this with me? And he said, sure. So, we went into partnership, and that was like the first band I ever managed was Testament.
Talk a little bit. So you were hesitant to go into management, but did that those anxieties manifest when you actually decided to take the leap?
No, I figured this let's do this. So obviously I had to learn as I went, but I came with a bunch of skills that turned out are useful as, when you can go into music management from all sorts of different angles. There are lawyers who do it. There are A&R people that do it. There are tour managers that do it. There are skills from each one of those areas that you can take with you. And we came in with a bunch of lawyer skills and had to learn the rest of it.
Absolutely fascinating. Speed metal. I really want you to talk about this. At the time, it was essentially a burgeoning new genre of music. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Metallica had hit. Slayer was just starting to get an audience. And as a matter of fact, my boss and I had negotiated their first major label deal. Megadeth was just starting to get popular. Anthrax was just starting to get popular.
Wow.
But it was still a pretty new genre.
We're putting this like 78 kind of a range area?
No, this is like 84.
84. Okay, so you graduate. So you're in that business with the other Jew through like 80, 81. Is that right? About there?
No, I got out of graduate. Let me think. I got out of law school in 81. Spent 2 or 3 years as a jury consultant. 84. Worked for a year for this computer company. 85. Started to work in the music business again in 85, probably. So we're probably talking 86, 87 that this is going on.
So, if you can, I'm curious because I have friends, they're not playing that style of music, but I mean, just in general, it's just so fascinating because you go through, well, you said it before too. I mean, Sean and Oz first 3 records didn't sell a lot. The company still, people didn't abandon groups that were playing original music for a long time. How was it that you were able to take Cats, even though it was a pretty new genre of music? First of all, what music did it come from, do you think?
Well, I think you start seeing groups like Black Sabbath hit.
Sure.
Actually, right around 1970, I think.
Absolutely.
Black Sabbath's album came out in 69.
Yeah.
So you got Ozzy, and then you've got, pretty hard British bands like Uriah Heep and Deep Purple, and then, Aerosmith starts hitting, and then it just gets heavier.
So I'm just, because it's not my bag. I mean, those Cats were, Ozzy, I know. Some of that stuff is just soaring, though. I mean, it doesn't, and a lot of it was melodic. I mean, was there still like...
well, Metallica, I think, is the first band that's not, at the beginning at least, is not melodic at all.
Right.
And Slayer. So, I'm not quite sure where it came from. But when I stepped into it, I couldn't believe that the music existed. This is, it's so at the time, I'm just curious because nowadays, my original question was, the amount, even locally, if we have a great jazz club that's been open here for a couple years and it's going to stick around called the Century Room, and we're talking the top level musicians, not necessarily like chops or anything, but like guys that just have great feel. They're amazing. And every time that they get together to play, they have to say, this is a tribute to Mulgrew Miller or Keith Jarrett. It's got to be some recognizable name so that if people are willing to pay, it has to be a recognizable person. The idea of actually going and saying, wow, this is original music. I'm not sure. They don't have a lot of pedigree, but it was even in the mid-'80s. What were the things that allowed you to at least even get like outside of a regional touring circuit for a band that Testament that was essentially completely unknown? Well, the circuit existed by then. I mean, I started going there. There were a couple of clubs in San Francisco and in the Bay Area that kind of specialized in, very hard metal.
What was their name? What were the names of those clubs?
Oh, boy.
This is really important. I've never heard of these clubs.
Oh. Boy.
And I know they existed. I know they did. If it comes to you later, let me know.
It's going to come later.
Yeah.
The Omni. There was a club called the Omni.
The Omni.
In Oakland.
Wow.
And, boy, there was a club that was like right on Broadway, just kind of in the corner, at one corner of North Beach. And damned if I can remember it. But I remember going to see Exodus.
Yeah.
They were another legal client of mine, but in sort of a similar genre. And I walked in, and the place was completely packed.
Holy.
And they started playing, and not only were there people diving off the stage, but there were people running across the tops of the heads of the people in the audience.
Oh, my God, dude. Are you kidding?
It was like a highway.
Oh, my God.
And it was just complete bedlam, and I went, oh, my God.
These were the early incarnation mosh pits, so to speak?
Yeah.
Cats were running across on people's heads.
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
And everybody was packed in tightly enough that it was like a highway, I represented Testament and Exodus and violence and forbidden evil and vicious rumors.
Dude, I cannot believe the thrash metal roster you had, dude. This is unbelievable.
Well, everybody but Metallica, which is the one band, of course, that really meant something in the Bay Area at the time. So, yeah, but we represented all of them.
I mean, so regionally there were some clubs there, but then ultimately,
no, there was a circuit around the country and also in Europe. So,
well, of course, so in the country, generally speaking, how many when you first got a hold of Testament, would you say that they went on a domestic touring circuit right away?
I'm trying to remember the first show I think that I did with them, although I didn't go, was a festival in Holland.
Wow.
And I remember I got a call from someone in the band saying that the label's representative had gotten into trouble with customs in Holland because she was wearing a T-shirt that said, "Speak English or die."
This is unbelievable.
Yeah, this is unbelievable. So my partner was a guy named Jeff Saltzman.
Right.
So, and our Cahn man was the name of our management company. And we were constantly telling them, would you please turn the volume down? I mean, I like loud music, but this is just out of control. And they had a sign in their rehearsal room that said, if it's too loud, you must be Jeff or Elliot.
Oh, my dude.
Yeah.
See, I mean, part of me, I would not be a purist if I was making good dough, but that music would be hard for me to, I mean, it's like supporting, you'd have to figure out a way to rationalize it and get behind it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I never was a fan of the music.
Right.
I appreciated it when it was done well, but it's not that I ever really liked it. I was just dedicated to their career, and my job was to help them, get as far as they could go and, do it with some level of integrity. But it's not like I was ever a big speed metal fan. Jeff Saltzman, my partner, I think appreciated it more than I did.
What was the, were you able to sort of, I guess I'm fascinated by this because it's just right now, with Road Dogs that are playing original music, the money for the gigs, there's no money for gigs anymore. And I have a feeling that with Exodus and the other bands you represented, was the bread pretty good for the actual gigs themselves? Because what's interesting is the only way that cats make money today playing original music is if they can actually make it to the merch table after playing a 3-hour exhaust, and they have to do all that themselves.
Well, at the low levels, yeah. At the upper levels, of course, there's a ton of money to be made on the road because ticket prices are so exorbitant now, and people are willing to pay them.
Absolutely. So back then, with those bands, how did those guys did they make good bread? Were you able to negotiate good bread for the actual gigs themselves?
No. It got to Testament. Let's just talk about their career. So I guess I worked on 4 or 5 albums with them, and the first one sold, I don't know, maybe 60 or 70,000 records, and the second maybe 125, and the third, maybe like 350 or so. And, their career touring, sort of was progressing at the same level. So their problem was that they spent so much money on production, because at the time, if you didn't have like this gigantic stack of
dummy
cabinets,
I know,
which I always thought was the most preposterous thing. It was sort of the equivalent of strapping a cucumber to your thigh when you're walking around in tight pants.
Dude, it was all about show. Size matters,
Exactly.
Yeah,
so
I did.
You got to convince people that. I guess most people in the audience didn't realize that 90% of these Marshall cabinets on stage had nothing in them.
Oh my God, that's
totally
insane. Oh my God, that's insane, dude. This is not. I mean, so it was becoming more about a show and much less about music.
Yeah, although they were into their music, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
So they really believed in it. It was not like Warrant or some of these hair bands where it really was all about show.
Right.
Yeah, these guys were totally into it. So
going back to the Winterland Productions, I mean, there was nobody. I mean, Bill Graham, as you know, would he would put the Preservation Hall Jazz Band, Malo, and the Sons of Champlin all in the same bill, and he'd be like, these hippies or whatever, they may not know who these cats are, but they need to dig this music. I mean, but with that speed metal, especially in the mid '80s when everything was conforming and becoming streamlined, were they on bills or were they on tour? Like, especially in the fledgling years when they were only selling 60 to 70,000 copies of the records, were they winding up on bills with other genres of music, or was it all speed metal?
No, it was pretty much all speed metal.
Oh, man.
So I remember they did one tour with, let me see if I can remember, it was Slayer.
Oh, yeah.
And Megadeth and Testament and Suicidal Tendencies.
This is unreal. That is so much of the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, man.
And I remember, the doors would open, and some of the shows, I would see kids literally run into the room and start smashing their fists into the walls until their fists bled, just to get into the spirit of it.
Oh my God. Dude, this was like the most primal. This is so fascinating because it's so, well, I guess is that kind of like, I mean, because it's so out of my bag. I mean, not to jump too far ahead, but, I don't know if you, that second Woodstock in the late 90s where it was chaos, there was just pandemonium. And a lot of that was metal, right? It was heavy metal.
Although I was there as Green Day's manager.
Well, we're going to have to do set 3 because I don't even want to jump into that yet.
But you just mentioned Woodstock too, so I was on stage.
Oh my God, you were there. You were freaking. Okay, let's just say I want to go ahead. Yeah. I mean.
So anyway, back to Testament.
Yeah.
So there's kind of an interesting story about them because their career was progressing really well. In terms of touring, the only way they could tour at the beginning was getting tour support from the record label, who would essentially, give them the money so that they could at least break even and then recoup it from their record sales.
Right.
But what happened, just around the time their 4th album came out, was Kurt Cobain happened.
Wow.
Nirvana happened.
Sure.
And overnight, boom, the blink of an eye, the musical taste of a whole generation of kids who liked hard music just changed. Boom. And it was, as somebody who felt responsible for the careers and the well-being of all of these heavy metal musicians, it was tragic.
Let me stop you right. That's a fascinating point. You're telling me on a dime, because I mean, I'm thinking Cobain was more that term grunge music.
Yeah.
But
well, that's,
what was that? So what was the, like, as a musician, what were the, I mean, I grew up on Cobain. I was in the early 90s. I was in junior high school. That stuff was, but what was it more musical? Why did it change like that? Or just because of the, Cobain was like a Jim Morrison kind of figure?
Yeah, it was just, okay, so let me just tell
Break
you
it down.
a funny kind of story.
Yeah.
So I got a call one day from the outside attorney for Nirvana's record label. And she said, Elliot, we got a bunch of bands, and there's Sub Pop Records, and they've never signed a record. None of them has ever signed a record deal. So I know that you represent a lot of independent bands. Would you be interested in representing some of them?
Wow.
And I said, sure, who are they? And she said, well, there's Mudhoney. And I'd heard of Mudhoney. I'm not sure if I'd ever heard a note of this, but I certainly knew who they existed.
Right.
They existed. And then she said, then there's this band called Nirvana, whom I had never heard of. And then she said, this is great. Then she said, but the one that we're all convinced is going to be the one is Tad.
No way.
Yeah. And Tad was fronted by a 300-pound butcher named Thomas A. Doyle, hence Tad.
Tad.
So she called me up a couple of days later and said, oh, Jesus, I'm sorry, Nirvana just signed with another lawyer 2 days ago. But I'm sure I can get you Mudhoney and Tad. So I ended up with Mudhoney and Tad and got record deals, with major labels for both of them. Tad really never did anything, and Mudhoney did a little bit in Nirvana, as you all know. So
wow.
Smells Like Teen Spirit started getting played on the radio, and the way you hear it from the label, from the record stations, radio stations, is their phones just, lit up immediately. And it just caught everybody.
Everybody, dude. That stuff was on repeat every day. It was in that, and we're everywhere. I guess it was worldwide, pretty much.
Yeah, absolutely.
Holy cow!
Nobody expected it, and it just grabbed everybody. So everybody, 90% of the kids who were into speed metal suddenly were grunge fans, and they didn't. They still wanted to see Metallica, but they really didn't want to see Anthrax or Metallica or Slayer or Testament or Exodus anymore. They didn't want to buy their records. So, everybody's career just hit a wall, boom, and it was kind of tragic.
How did you deal with that? Those cats, I'm sure they were taking out their frustration on somebody. How as a litigator, but also, you wear many different hats. It's like
I was never a litigator, but I was a lawyer.
A lawyer, yeah, okay, yeah.
And I cared about their careers, and I just said, guys, this wave is coming, and it's going to bury you if you don't really be careful and tighten your belts. And you can't have 17 dummy cabinets on stage anymore because you can't get the,
you just don't have that kind of
get the merchandising advances to keep you afloat, to keep you going. So it was tough.
Just going back for a second though, you're telling, I know that, we're talking, I don't know if you ever knew guys like Jerry Pompili, Bill Graham.
Sure.
Okay,
sure, I know Jerry well.
So love the cat. So I did a couple interviews with him, and he was talking about Bruce Springsteen, early '70s had not had a radio hit yet, and he had made Wild Innocent, E Street Shuffle, and Bill had given him these records to listen to figure out who the hot band was. And, he listened to this record. He goes, I think these guys are going to be fucking amazing. And sure enough, he came to Winterland, and it absolutely manifested that way. But, we're talking Bruce, Joni Mitchell. I know that, James Taylor. Those cats could go out And because they were on major record labels, like you said, even if the tours lost money, it could still be written off because based on the amount of records they were selling.
Yeah.
And
let me tell you a story, by the way.
Please,
so,
yeah.
I was sitting in a dressing room at a college gig somewhere in the Midwest, and our drummer came into the dressing room and said, "Gino," as was my name at the time, "you got to see this guy who's opening for us." And I said, "Who is it?" He said, "His name is Bruce Springsteen." Never heard of him. I said, "What does he sound like?" Because Jocko's saying, "You got to come upstairs and listen to the rest of his set." And when you talk about somebody that no one has heard of before, you sort of look for points of comparison.
Sure.
So he said he sort of sounds like a cross between Dylan and Van Morrison.
Oh my, that's classic.
Both of them I love, and of course, for the past 40 years, 50 years, he sounds like Bruce Springsteen. Doesn't sound like anybody.
Sure.
But okay, I'll go up. So I went upstairs, and he was right at the end of his set, and I think he was playing Rosalita for the first or second time.
Oh my God.
And I just went, wow, this guy is amazing.
That band was hot too.
Yeah. So he was trying to break into the college market because at the time, it may still be the case, you could get, sort of in early stages of your career, you could get paid a lot more money playing in colleges than you could playing clubs.
At Mahavishnu Orchestra did that. I mean, Billy Cobham had T-shirts from West Virginia University. Everybody was doing that college circuit.
Yeah, so Bruce was trying to break into the college market, so he ended up opening, half a dozen shows for us. And once again, it's not like we're ever the best buddies, but we hung out together.
That is so. Wait, was he talking like 70 roughly?
This is probably 73, early 70s.
Yeah, exactly. Unbelievable. But I mean,
so his first album had come out and not done very well, and they hadn't recorded "The Wildly Innocent" yet. But the songs they were starting to play, Rosalita ended up being the big song on that album.
That's exactly. Yeah, but I'll send you that Pompili interview because it's a great story about him throwing on this record and being like, "Wow!" He got a bunch of them, Elton John, and the one that stood out to him was Bruce Springsteen, who was still relatively unknown. You're telling me that even at Joni Mitchell can go out, lose money, but still sell hundreds of thousands of records. With Testament, they still, even with the record company was still willing to float them on tour.
Yeah, because at the time, people sold records.
That was the medium, yeah. Right.
Yeah, people don't sell records anymore, so
right.
You went out on the road to promote your records. And selling records could be very lucrative for record companies. Not so lucrative for the recording artists because of the way the contracts were structured, but very lucrative for the record labels if a record was successful. So
that's a good point. And you're also talking about mid to late 80s when CDs had not fully taken over the market either. It was really
right.
still a record-based industry.
Yep.
That's right. So, can we just put a button in this now and then let this breathe for a minute and then do a set 3?
Sure.
I think
Absolutely.
And let's we'll put a button in Kurt Cobain. What is that? 91, 90? I don't even know when that happened.
Nirvana hits maybe 92.
Yeah,
91,
that's it.
like
I was in 8th, 9th. I remember, dude. By the time I was in high school, which was 94, it was everywhere. I mean, it was nuts. In fact, so that's really, ultimately we have the whole other part of your career to still take care of. So let's